Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why some people get really upset about their group not getting ahead, while others feel bad about their own group having too much? Well, this new study dives deep into that very question. Imagine you are part of a large group like the majority ethnic group in a country. You've probably heard people talking about how groups are treated unfairly. But what if your reaction to that talk depends on whether you think your group is losing out or maybe getting too much? That is the core idea behind this fascinating research. It explores how people in majority groups think about their group status. Are they frustrated because they feel deprived, or are they frustrated because they feel their group is unfairly privileged? The researchers noticed something interesting happening in the world. On one hand, you have movements that claim the majority group is being disadvantaged, kind of like an anti-woke sentiment. On the other hand, you have movements highlighting real inequalities, like Black Lives Matter, which might make some people in the majority group uncomfortable with their own group's advantages. This suggests that people in majority groups can be unhappy for very different, even opposite, reasons. So, how do we understand these different feelings? The researchers look at something called relative deprivation. It is basically how we feel when we compare our group to other groups. It has two main parts. First, the cognitive part: do you think your group is at a disadvantage compared to others? Second, the affective part: does this perception make you feel frustrated or upset? Usually, these two go together. You think you are worse off, and that makes you upset. But here is the twist. This idea of relative deprivation has mostly been studied for groups that are actually at a disadvantage. What about majority groups, who are typically seen as being at the top of the social ladder? The researchers wondered if, for these groups, the thinking you are worse off part and the feeling frustrated part might not always go hand in hand. Maybe you can feel frustrated without thinking your group is disadvantaged. Perhaps because you feel bad about your group having unearned advantages. To figure this out, the scientists used a cool statistical tool called latent profile analysis. Think of it like sorting people into different groups, not based on a few simple questions, but by looking at complex patterns of how they answer a bunch of questions about their feelings. They did this with a big group of adults in New Zealand who identified as European, the main ethnic group there. They also replicated it in 2 samples from the UK. Their main goal was to see if they could find a specific type of person, someone from the majority group who doesn't think their group is disadvantaged, low cognitive deprivation, but still feels a lot of frustration. High affective deprivation, they called this the frustrated gratification profile. They suspected these people might be more liberal and care more about fairness. In the New Zealand study, they gathered information from over 38,000 people who identified as European. They asked them questions to measure their feelings about their group's economic status compared to other groups. These were the cognitive and affective deprivation questions. For example, one question might be, people from my ethnic group generally earn less than other groups in New Zealand, and another, I am frustrated by what my ethnic group earns relative to other groups in New Zealand. They also measured other things. A big one was social dominance, orientation, or SDO. This measures how much someone believes in social hierarchies, basically, whether some groups are naturally meant to be above others. People with high SDO tend to like the status quo and think inequality is just how things are. They also looked at things like nationalism, patriotism, and even modern racism. After running their analysis, they found 5 distinct groups or profiles of people based on their answers about deprivation. Let's break down these 5 groups. First, the biggest group, making up almost half of the sample, 45.1%, were the low deprivation group. These folks pretty much felt neither disadvantaged nor particularly frustrated about their group's economic standing. Then there was a large group, about 31%, called the moderate deprivation group. They felt a little bit of both a moderate sense of disadvantage and some frustration. Next, about 10% of people were in the high deprivation group. They strongly felt their group was at a disadvantage and were quite frustrated about it. This is what traditional relative deprivation theory might predict for a group feeling left behind. There was also a small group, about 3.1%, labeled high cognitive deprivation. These individuals felt their group was quite disadvantaged, but their level of frustration wasn't as high. It is like they recognized the problem intellectually, but weren't as emotionally riled up about it. And here is the really exciting one. The group they hypothesized, the frustrated gratification profile. This group, making up about 10.7% of the sample, was different. They had low scores on feeling their group was disadvantaged, but high scores on feeling frustrated. This is the group that wasn't upset because they thought they were losing out, but perhaps because they were uncomfortable with their group's advantages. Now, what did they find about these groups? When they looked at what made people fall into these different profiles, some really clear patterns emerged, especially when comparing everyone to the frustrated gratification group. For instance, people with higher social dominance orientations. Those who believe in social hierarchies were much more likely to be in the low, moderate, or high deprivation groups, and much less likely to be in the frustrated gratification group. That makes sense. If you believe some groups should be on top, you are less likely to be bothered by your own group's privilege. The frustrated gratification group stood out dramatically in their attitudes. They were the most left-leaning, showing the lowest levels of right-wing attitudes. They also had the lowest scores on modern racism, meaning they were much less likely to hold prejudiced views against minority groups. Crucially, this frustrated gratification group showed the highest support for Maori political mobilization. Maori are the indigenous people of New Zealand, and supporting their political efforts would typically be seen as challenging the existing social hierarchy, aligning with the desire for greater equality. They also showed the strongest support for left-wing political parties like the Green Party and Te Pāti Māori, the Maori-focused party. Conversely, they showed the lowest support for right-wing parties. The really cool part is that they found these same patterns in the UK samples too. Even though the UK doesn't have a large indigenous minority population like New Zealand, the idea of a majority group being uncomfortable with its advantages still held up. They found the frustrated gratification profile, though sometimes a bit smaller, and it showed similar tendencies towards more liberal views and less prejudice. So, what does this all mean? The study suggests that traditional ways of thinking about relative deprivation might miss a crucial part of the picture, especially for majority groups. We can't just assume that negative feelings about group status always come from feeling deprived. Some people, particularly those who value equality more and have lower social dominance orientation, can feel frustrated not because their group is losing out, but because they are aware of and uncomfortable with their group's unearned privileges. These people are the supportive allies the researchers mention, ready to challenge the status quo. Think about it this way. The low deprivation group might be people who are just happy with how things are, or maybe don't think about it much. The frustrated gratification group, however, seems to be actively thinking about fairness and justice, and feeling uneasy when their own group benefits from systems that might be unfair to others. This unease can lead them to support policies and movements that aim for more equality, like supporting the political mobilization of minority groups. The high cognitive deprivation group was also interesting. They perceived their group as disadvantaged, but didn't show as much emotional frustration. The researchers suggest this might be because they see the system itself as mostly fair, so their feelings of disadvantage might be misattributed or focused on other things. They still had higher levels of system justification, meaning they believed the current societal structures were generally okay. Now, no study is perfect, and these researchers are upfront about that, because they can't directly ask people, do you think your group's privilege is illegitimate? They infer it from political attitudes and other factors, while their findings strongly suggest this is the case. They admit there could be other interpretations for the frustration felt by the frustrated gratification group, like maybe a fear of losing status, though their political leanings make this less likely. Also, the UK samples, while showing similar patterns, were smaller, so they couldn't do as deep an analysis as in New Zealand. It'll be interesting to see if this profile is a stable personality trait or something that can change over time, especially as discussions about inequality continue. Ultimately, this research reveals that within majority groups there is more diversity of thought than we might assume. It is not just about whether you feel your group is winning or losing. A significant portion of people feel something more complex, a frustration with their group's existing advantages and a desire for a more equal society. This frustrated gratification profile offers a new lens to understand why some members of privileged groups become champions for change. It shows that recognizing unfair advantages can be a powerful motivator for social justice, even for those who aren't personally experiencing disadvantage. It is a reminder that understanding people's perceptions and feelings is key to understanding societal dynamics. What do you think about these different profiles? Do you see yourself or people you know in any of these groups? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want more science explained, simply be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.